Hello, my name is Tim Bernard. This is part 2 of the documentary Prophets, Prophecy, and the Twin Towers. This part is primarily made up of 3 documentaries that Alex Jones made, which are listed at the end, and I would recommend all of them. I would also recommend going to his website, which you see here. And there's a lot of information on this website on a multitude of issues that are facing us. Also, Alex has a 3-hour show which he rebroadcasts 24/7 throughout the day. So you can go there, click on the stream, and listen to it over the internet, or find a local radio station where you can listen to it. Because he has very good information. He interviews a wide range of people from the government, the military, business, media, and the entertainment industry, activists, and the general public from all around the world. The first part of this 2-part documentary looked at the grand strategy for setting up the New World Order. There are a lot of subjects, and it will take a while to digest the big picture, which is not a pretty picture. You should research some of this on your own and help to spread the truth, for it is only if we wake up that we can lessen the problems that are coming. Bohemian Grove was so satanic that I had a hard time believing it even after I'd seen the 60 Minutes hit piece. But they didn't go inside and really expose what was going on, as you saw in the first part. So I went and looked it up in the article from Parade Magazine from February 21st of 1981, where it clearly states that they do Druidic ceremonies, which is pagan ceremonies, and this is a place where people with conservative family values go. And I don't think anybody who looks at that and what goes on there would call that conservative family values. Now, as we enter the beginning of the 21st century, we'll see how they really ratcheted it up in the 90s to fulfill the prophecy of Nostradamus, that when the cycle of the centuries would be renewed, there would be wars and famine, and everything would be controlled to bring about the one world government, or as they like to call it, the New World Order. Now here's something that really isn't a prophecy, but it did lay out what we will see unfolding, and has been unfolding. This is the final speech that President Eisenhower gave in 1960. It's known as the Military-Industrial Complex speech. We're just going to read a couple parts from it. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. And we can clearly see this happening, and you will get concrete evidence of this being fulfilled in the next 2 hours. It's another interesting line. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that the public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. And that is one of the things they're using to help bring about their plan by bamboozling people. The first part of this documentary looks at several events. The last part deals with preparation of the population in the U.S. for martial law and the complete control of the population, and then a 90% reduction in the population. And it is in plain view in documents, and here are the Georgia Guidestones with the new 10 Commandments. The first one being to maintain a population of 500 million on the earth. And you have to ask yourself, who gets to choose, who gets to stay, and who has to go? But God has something to say about this. We have to resist the microchip and the mark of the beast, which will follow. And you'll see evidence of that near the end of the documentary. But there is going to be a fantastic loss of life, as the prophecy from Zechariah is fulfilled. About 2/3 of the people will die, good as well as bad. For when it rains on everyone, the good and the bad. But in the end, God's will prevail, and we will see a long period of peace. That is something that is also mentioned by Nostradamus. Now, let's watch LBJ. After the removal of JFK, he lies us into war. Look at the headlines of today. Nothing has changed. And at the end of the 20th century, you can see where this really picks up.
Who pulls the strings and who benefits from the dark spectacle of modern warfare? We will answer the question, do the people know how they are controlled? Do they understand the systems of power that surround them? The modern propaganda machines of public relations that wash their brains and fill their minds full of ball games and mindless fluff? Is the population beginning to realize that governments throughout history have used the specter of fear to drive their populations into acquiescing to total tyranny? September 11th, national ID cards, Big Brother, the Iraq War, the 7/7 bombings in London, the invasion of Iran. How are they all interconnected? Historical events that are not contested, events where the fact of government-sponsored terror is not debated, but in fact openly admitted to by Western governments. There are literally hundreds of examples of government-sponsored terrorism in modern history, or what are known as false flag operations, or covert operations conducted by governments, corporations, or by other organizations, which are designed to appear as if they were carried out by other entities. The name is derived from the military concept of flying false colors, that is, flying the flag of a country other than your own. There are many variants of false flag operations, but one of the most popular carried out by governments is to stage a terror attack or horrible criminal incident and then blame it on your political enemies. And now the Gulf of Tonkin incident. In the summer of 1964, President Lyndon Baines Johnson needed a pretext to commit the American people to the already expanding covert war in Southeast Asia.
3 communist PT boats attacked an American destroyer off the coast of Vietnam yesterday, and today President Johnson's response was hard and tough.
To any armed attack upon our forces, we shall reply. To any in Southeast Asia who ask our help in defending their freedom, we shall give it.
In November of 2001, the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum released tapes of phone conversations with the President and then Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, where they openly discussed plans to use the staged Gulf of Tonkin incident as a pretext to expand the war. Then, in late 2005, the National Security Agency declassified its own official history of the Gulf of Tonkin and admitted that intelligence agency officers had deliberately skewed the intelligence and claimed that Vietnamese patrol boats had attacked U.S. destroyers on August 4, 1964, when in reality they had done nothing, even while being fired on by U.S. forces. Congress then authorized the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The Tonkin Lie paved the way for 58,000 American deaths and over 1.5 million dead Vietnamese. In the early 1960s, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Ella Lemonster, concocted a plan for false flag operations as a pretext to invade Cuba and for war with the Soviet Union. In Operation Northwoods, they planned to hijack jets by remote control, crash them, and blame the attack on Cuba. There were many other terrorist attacks they planned to carry out that were contained within the document. One scenario mentioned was the destruction of a U.S. naval vessel that was to be blamed on a foreign power as a pretext for war with any enemy they picked. President Lyndon Baines Johnson went operational with Northwoods on June 8, 1967 during the Six-Day War. During the Six-Day War between Israel and the Arab nations, the USS Liberty was sent by Johnson to collect electronic intelligence in the eastern Mediterranean. The clearly marked U.S. intelligence ship was 14 miles off the coast of Israel in international waters.
A short time after the air attack had been completed, the 3 torpedo boats approached us from our starboard quarter at high speed and in an apparent torpedo launch attitude.
Israeli surveillance aircraft flew low over the ship and clearly identified it as an American vessel. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, the USS Liberty was attacked by 3 Mirage 3 fighter bombers. From the onset of the attack, the fighter bombers were jamming U.S. signals. Not only were they jamming U.S. signals specifically, they were also unmarked, the only unmarked aircraft in Israel's arsenal. The fighter bombers strafed the ships with their cannons, dropped conventional munitions and napalm on the ship, repeatedly from stem to stern. After the Mirages had done their work, the ship was hit by medium bomber Dassault missiles carrying napalm and other munitions like white phosphorus. The USS Liberty was then attacked by 3 Israeli torpedo boats bearing Israeli flags. The torpedo gunboats opened fire with high-caliber machine guns and launched torpedoes. A single torpedo struck the ship, blowing a hole in both sides, entering the ship and leaving a 30-foot exit hole when it exploded. Then the torpedo boats began strafing life rafts in the water, an international war crime. While all of this was happening, the oversized American flag flew clearly above the ship. The attack on the Liberty went on for hour after hour after hour. During the entire attack, the USS Liberty continually called the Sixth Fleet that was nearby, begging for air support or rescue. 2 aircraft carriers in the Med responded by launching fighter aircraft. Unbelievably, they were recalled by the White House. Rear Admiral Geist, then commanding the carriers in the Sixth Fleet, called Washington personally to confirm the recall order. Secretary of Defense McNamara came on the line, and then President Johnson himself told Geist, "I want that goddamn ship going to the bottom. No help. Recall the wings." Imagine being Admiral Geist begging the president to allow you to defend an American ship that's under attack and being told by him that he wants the ship going to the bottom. Despite the fact that the U.S. carriers withdrew their help, a Russian spy ship appeared and witnessed part of the attack. After 3 hours into the attack, the Israelis withdrew because there were witnesses, allowing the damaged USS Liberty to limp to safety. 40 years after the attack on the USS Liberty, we know exactly what happened. I've interviewed former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Thomas Moore. I've interviewed the admirals that were on the line who heard what President Johnson said. I've even talked to the head JAG officer of the Navy who was ordered to falsify the reports and cover up what had really happened. One of the Israeli pilots has gone public as well, saying that 3 times he refused over his radio to headquarters to attack the ship, saying clearly that it was an American ship in international waters and an ally. He was ordered under threat of court-martial to engage the ship. In a nutshell, this is what happened. President Johnson had personal control over the ship, parked it in the Mediterranean, made a backroom deal with Israel to attack it with an order to kill all aboard. Then the attack on the ship was to be blamed on Egypt. The U.S. would enter the war and take over the entire Middle East. In the aftermath of the attack on the most highly decorated ship in U.S. history, the captain and his entire crew were told they would spend life in prison or be killed if they told anyone what happened. Captain William L. McGonigal was given the Congressional Medal of Honor in secret and told not to tell anyone that he had won the award. On October 6, 1976, 2 time bombs made of C-4 planted on a Douglas DC-8 aircraft exploded, killing all 73 people on board in the most deadly act of airline terrorism in the Western Hemisphere until September 11, 2001. The plane was carrying Olympic athletes from 3 countries, including gold medal winners from Cuba. Declassified FBI and CIA documents show that the convicted bombers of the flight had been given U.S. visas just days before the attack and that they were in the employ of the U.S. government. This had been reported on in respected publications for years, but has now been confirmed by multiple declassifications. Cuban plane bomber was CIA agent. Declassified U.S. government documents show that a man suspected of involvement in the bombing of a Cuban passenger plane worked for the CIA. Luis Posada Carrillos.
Just to remind you about what was going on at the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 90s, the Soviet Union that had formed after World War II fell apart. Here are some pictures of the Berlin Wall, which had been built to try and keep the East Germans from defecting to the West. Many died trying. Here they are tearing the wall down. In China, there was a democracy movement that was brutally crushed. And in the U.S., there was talk of a peace dividend and all the good that we could do with the extra money from the defense budget. That was until the first World Trade Center bombing. Just watch the premise of the book 1984 unfold with the endless war.
Now you'll see the evidence of the federal government targeting the World Trade Center twice. October 28th, 93, and October 31st, 1993, New York Times, as well as the December 15th Chicago Tribune. The federal government was actually caught on tape by their informants, ordering them to let the bombing go forward, to cook the bomb, to give the terrorists the detonators, to create yet another crisis, this time to usher in a police state and a war upon the American people. Unlike the Northwoods plan, the FBI actually carried out the attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. They actually hired a retired 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer, Ahmad Salam, and paid him $1 million and gave him real explosives, a detonator, and told him to build a bomb and to give it to the foolish people that he was controlling to allow them to attack the World Trade Center complex. There was only one problem with their plan. Mr. Salam was not as ruthless and sociopathic as the FBI and their globalist controllers. He began to get very concerned right before and, of course, after the attack, saying, "Why are you giving me real explosives if this is just a sting operation?" When they told him to go ahead and let the attack go forward, he secretly recorded the head of the FBI in New York ordering him to let the bombing take place. It's very important to understand that all the evidence you just saw is documented, 110%. It is part of the public record. The FBI admits it, but the media wrote a few stories about it. There were a couple of nightly newscasts. It was never heard of again.
I'm sorry for the poor audio.
Last winter, the FBI was praised for its speed in cracking the case of the World Trade Center bombing and bringing 4 suspects to trial. Now, there is some evidence that the FBI may have known the plot in advance through an informant and might even have stopped the bombing that killed 6 people. Correspondent Jacqueline Adams has the story.
FBI agents might have been able to prevent last February's deadly explosion at New York's World Trade Center. They discussed secretly substituting harmless powder for the explosives, but they didn't, according to the FBI's own informant, Emad Salem. Unbeknownst to the FBI at the time, Salem recorded many of his conversations with his handlers.
I'm holding 903 pages of draft transcripts.
In one, Salem complains to an FBI agent, "Since the bomb went off, I feel terrible. I feel bad. I feel here is people who don't listen." The agent replies, "Hey, I mean, it wasn't like you didn't try and I didn't try. You can't force people to do the right thing."
But unlike Pearl Harbor, where the government allowed the Japanese to attack as a pretext for war, the federal government financed and controlled this attack on the World Trade Center to create a system of anti-terrorism, to sic a homeland security system on the American people. There was only one problem. The drivers of the truck didn't park it up against the main support column as they had been ordered to do by Mr. Salam and the FBI. No, my friends, they parked it about a dozen feet away, and so it didn't bring down the building. And in consequence, they didn't get the massive death toll they needed to create the martial law system they were hell-bent on implementing against our constitutional republic and the American people.
In Oklahoma, now we see another botched job in Oklahoma City, where the evidence is in plain sight, but with a little spin, a fictitious story is painted, and the truth is literally buried.
April 19th, 1995, in downtown Oklahoma City, multiple bombs ripped through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. And as usual, federal fingerprints were all over this tragic event. Then President Bill Clinton, taking his orders from on high from the New World Order chieftains, needed a crisis to get his gun control agenda through, as well as his plans for a socialized America. Taking a page out of the Strong Men's Handbook, Bill Clinton knew that a crisis of this magnitude, endless images of mangled children, would pull on the heartstrings of the American people, and they would beg for the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act that he had failed to pass just a year before. The bill absolutely eviscerated massive sections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We've been investigating this tragedy for over 6 years. The amount of evidence is staggering. Let's just hit some of the key points. Now let's get into it.
Station that one explosion caused, because here's now what we are starting to learn about the succession, or what someone obviously hoped would be a succession of explosions. The first bomb that was in the federal building did go off. It did the damage that you see right there. The second explosive was found and diffused. The third explosive that was found, and they are working on right now as we speak, I understand, both the second and third explosives, if you can imagine this, were larger than the first. So try to imagine 2- or 3-fold happening what we've already seen there. It is just incredible to think that there was that much heavy artillery that was somehow moved into the downtown Oklahoma City Federal Building.
2 other explosive devices were found that were not detonated, and they were larger than the first.
I think he said another bomb.
Another bomb, move back. Oh my God, another bomb.
We just saw, if you were watching there was a white pickup truck backing a trailer into the scene here. They're trying to move people out of the way so they can get it in. Appears to be the Oklahoma County Bomb Squad. It's their bomb disposal unit, essentially, is what it is, and it is what they would use to, if the report that we gave you just a few moments ago turns out to be correct, that they have found a second explosive device of some kind inside this building. They'll back that trailer down there, and the bomb squad folks will go in, and they will use that trailer. You see the bucket on the back there, sort of, this is how they would transport the explosive device away from this populated area to try to do something with it.
The Justice Department is reporting that a second explosive device has been found in the A.P. Murrah building in downtown Oklahoma City. Mike, you're still with us, aren't you?
Yes, I am, and I might tell you in addition to that, in fact, what we were told at the scene a few minutes ago was that, in fact, 2 different explosive devices were found in addition to the one that went off.
So a total of 3,
A total of 3.
Now confirmed through federal authorities that a second bomb has been found inside that federal building in Oklahoma City. It was an explosion at 9 o'clock this morning that did that damage you're looking at right there, blowing off the entire north face of that building. Again, you're looking at the north face there. A second bomb was found on the east side of that building. A bomb squad is on the scene. That second bomb has not exploded. We don't know quite the status yet, if they've managed to defuse it, but it has been confirmed that a second bomb was found on the east side.
I have is that one device was deactivated. Apparently there's another device, and obviously whatever did the damage to the Murrah building was a tremendous, very sophisticated explosive device.
So President Clinton just called Frank Keating, Governor Frank Keating, and he says that 3 FBI anti-terrorist teams are en route to Oklahoma City. Right now, they are saying that this is the work of a sophisticated group. This is a very sophisticated device, and it has to have been done by an explosives expert. Obviously, with this type of explosion.
The medical teams downtown are unable to get into the wreckage to retrieve more of the injured because of the presence of other bombs in the area.
Well, I just took a look down the street at the Murrah building again. I see another bomb truck going, so apparently they're going to try to get out that third bomb that's been talked about. Still a lot of activity around the Murrah building. Security concerns that another one still might go off.
Fortunately, it didn't, because the second device that they found, we understand, was even more powerful than the first. They then found a third device, and you can see the look on this woman's face at the fear that she might have to go through the same thing again. They then found a third device, which was also larger than the first. Hard to feel lucky at this point, but certainly through some good work by some munitions experts and the explosive sniffing dogs, further tragedy has almost certainly been averted here.
But it was a great stroke of luck that we actually have got diffused bombs. It's through the bomb material that we will be able to track down who committed this atrocity.
It would have been an incredible help to have been able to get a hold of those unexploded bombs. Unfortunately, the BATF, according to police and firefighter testimony, were inside removing them and spiriting them away because they had to keep their story straight that there was only one bomb, a truck bomb. Out of hundreds of people we interviewed, we couldn't find a single person who said they'd heard only one explosion.
Did you live here, Charles, at the time of the bomb?
I live here. I work right here in this building. I was at work. I was at work.
Did you feel it?
Yeah, I thought this building was blowing up.
How many blasts did you feel?
2.
And how far apart were they?
Oh, probably about boom, and then it's boom.
It's a historical fact, part of the public record, that there were multiple devices inside the Oklahoma City building, and that there were at least 2 explosions. The emergency radio transmission transcripts show clearly that the police and firefighters were on the record witnessing the BATF removing unexploded devices. But you see, we have the actual scientific fact. We have the University of Oklahoma's own seismograph reports, as well as the U.S. Geological Survey reports. 2 different scientific institutions showing multiple explosions. But you see, McVeigh would have had accomplices, and that didn't fit in to the federal story, especially if the reality showed that it had to be somebody who had access to a federal building for long extended periods of time. General Benton K. Parton is the former head of Air Force Weapons Development and had over 30-plus years running the Air Force Weapons Development Program. He has multiple engineering degrees. General Parton was amazed by press reports claiming the building had been blown in and that a truck bomb could cause that damage, when even basic understanding of explosive signature shows that the building was blown not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Within days of the blast, General Benton K. Parton was on the scene. But of course he was barred access. But from video as well as photographs of the columns, it was obvious to any trained eye that the columns had been blown off by shape charges. In a detailed report, the former head of Air Force Weapons Development laid out the physics, the mathematics. It was a physical impossibility for a truck bomb, even made of military-grade explosives, couldn't even begin to approach the damage that was brought against the Oklahoma City Federal Building. Now the seismographs come in. You see, the seismographs first registered one distinct explosion and then a group of explosions so close to each other that they couldn't be separated. You see, the feds had to have a diversionary blast. They had to be able to tell the world that it was that lone nut McVeigh out front. You see, they needed McVeigh's truck bomb outside so they could cover the fact that there was actually explosives inside the structure. And if you look at the actual crater that was there, it was so small it could hardly be measured. But later in media reports, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. Another key piece of evidence that General Parton raises is that a single bomb explosion cannot account for the failure of column B, which was further from the truck bomb than columns B4 and B5, which did not fail. He concludes that the asymmetrical nature of the damage to the Murrah building is one indication of demolition charges were being used in the bombing. In modern history, literally thousands of structures of every type and design have been destroyed commercially to make way for new structures. But that didn't matter to the BATF, the federal government, and the media. They turned structural engineering on its head, telling the world that a single truck bomb actually did this damage, and with this signature that clearly showed that the building had been blown out, not in. Not only was the scientific and engineering world in shocked disbelief, the general public wasn't buying the story because they'd seen what had happened. Outraged by the federal cover-up, leaders from across Oklahoma, led by State Representative Charles Key, banded together to put together the final report, 550 pages detailing this criminal federal operation. Now let's look at the cowardice of the BATF. You see, they got a warning, but they didn't pass it on to the children in the daycare center.
What he told him is that he thought that they had received a tip that morning of the bomb.
Yet another witness, a rescue worker, says after she talked with an agent at the bombing scene, she also suspected the ATF was warned and agents stayed away from their office that morning.
I asked him if his office was in the building, and he said yes. And I asked if there were any ATF agents that were still in the building, and he said no, we weren't here.
Witness number one approached an ATF agent nearby. He claims he asked the agent what had happened, and witness number one says this is what the agent told him.
He started getting a little bit nervous. He tried reaching somebody on a two-way radio. Couldn't get anybody, and I told him I wanted an answer right then. He said they were in debriefing. None of the agents had been in there. They had been tipped by their pagers not to come into work that day. Plain as day out of his mouth. They were tipped. Why wasn't anybody else? There was a lot of people, good people, died down there. And if they knew, they should have let everybody else know.
Oklahoma City paramedic Tiffany Bible, who heroically responded just minutes after the blast on April 19, 1995, swore in an affidavit that when she arrived, the BATF was in full mop gear, bomb gear that takes at least 30 minutes to put on. When she asked them, oh my goodness, were you guys hurt inside the blast? They said, no, we got tipped off by our pagers not to come in today.
Agents forewarned about a bomb in Oklahoma City. Did they know the Murrah building was a target? The ATF says no, absolutely not. But tonight in a story you'll see only on the news channel, you're about to hear otherwise from people who were at the Murrah building that morning.
We're asking simple questions and we can't get any answers, so it makes us that much more curious, you know. Where the hell were they?
The news channel did ask for a private meeting with ATF officials to discuss the credibility of these witness reports, but the ATF refused, saying they had no more to say on the subject.
Danny Coulson, the FBI's top counterterrorism agent, checked into an Oklahoma City hotel nearly 9 hours before a truck bomb nearly leveled the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. The Embassy Suites Hotel receipt of Danny Coulson, the director of the FBI's Terrorist Task Force and founding commander of the Bureau's hostage rescue team, was dated April 19, 1995, with a check-in time of 0:20. That's military time for 12:20 a.m. Almost 9 hours before the blast, Chief Agent Coulson lied to the American people. He told a Time magazine reporter in 1999 the harrowing tale of how he sped at over 100 miles an hour from his home in Dallas, trying to get there after the bombing to save people and conduct an investigation. Oh, and by the way, the FBI won't release any of the credit card statements and records for any of their agents. What are they trying to hide?
The system wasn't working. Going through the system didn't work. I did everything that they advised me to do. It didn't do any good.
Hoppy Heidelberg was an upstanding member of the community with no criminal record. He'd been a grand juror for years. But when he started asking questions about the Middle Eastern connection and FBI prior knowledge and BATF involvement, the FBI actually came to his house brandishing firearms and told him to shut his mouth if he knew what was good for him. When he refused to be part of the cover-up and demanded that he be able to call witnesses as his right as a grand juror, the judge kicked him off the case. Just one more piece of this massive cover-up.
The News Channel has learned of another strange development. Apparently, before the bombing, Governor Frank Keating's brother, Mark, had been working on a novel about a terrorist bombing in Oklahoma City. Stranger still, one of the characters in the novel was named Thomas McVeigh.
Governor Frank Keating's brother, Martin Keating, wrote The Final Jihad. In the book, Tom McVeigh masterminds the bombing of the Oklahoma City building. He dedicated the book to the Knights of the Secret Circle, a known Illuminati group. And he wrote the book 2 years before the bombing. The tragic events of Oklahoma City, if the truth was known to the public, makes it even more tragic, even more horrific. You see, it's now a monument to the police state, a monument to the sacrifice the government made of American lives, of American blood, of American tears, as an excuse to get the feds to be able to circle the wagons against the American people, to have a pretext, an excuse to expand their police state. They covered the whole operation up. It's clear that they had prior knowledge that multiple bombs were detonated on the inside of the building, that the feds have grabbed the 12 surveillance camera tapes and are refusing to release them, even in 2002. Threatening grand jurors, destroying the building and burying it under guard. The federal government blamed this tragic event on Christians, conservatives, gun owners. But if you look at the evidence, it's clear who's behind it. The federal government. And they use this, just like Hitler used the Reichstag, to get martial law cranking in America.
$62 million is coming to Oklahoma soon to help anti-terrorism and disaster relief efforts.
Government crime certainly does pay, especially when it's government-sponsored terrorism against its own institutions. That's right, the BATF locally got tens of millions of dollars extra funding, but so did every other federal agency that tries to control the American people. $24 billion increase in anti-terrorism funds. And after September 11th, they've now tripled that. And of course, the BATF ensured that the building was completely demolished, so there couldn't be any evidence of their heinous acts. And that's right, ladies and gentlemen, they actually buried the building under guard at a private landfill with Wackenhut guards protecting it. From A to Z, federal fingerprints all over it and doing everything they can to suppress the truth. For Bill Clinton, the servant of the New World Order.
Well, now that we've seen the events that unfolded after the death of JFK and the first World Trade Center attack, Oklahoma bombing, now it's time to take a long, hard look at what really happened on September 11th. We're going to focus in a lot on building number 7. It's not even mentioned in this 47-story building, over 500 feet tall. Just happened to fall down at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You're going to see some very interesting footage on that. There was an interesting song that was popular during the Vietnam War. It went, 1, 2, 3, 4, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam. And this is what we were fighting for back then. It's all about money, greed, the military-industrial complex. Here's an interesting article. About 360 tons of cash, $100 bills, that were shipped over to Iraq and just vanished. Nobody knows where. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. Now, 2 months before 9/11, Alex Jones told people to call their senators and congressmen that there would be an attack and that it would be blamed on Osama bin Laden. It's not because he's a mystic, it's because he read the intel.
I'm going to put the call out that you call the White House and tell them, look, we've seen the news stories that you wanted to blow things up, that you have blown things up, and that you're saying that 4 million of us are going to die and we need martial law and the Associated Press. At one of your little drills you had. And that we're aware of who the terrorists are if you pull this. This can stop this Hitlerian Reichstag event. I want to put the toll-free number up for Congress. And I won't want you to believe Alex Jones. I want you to go get these news stories off my website. I want you to call these major newspapers. I want you to find out these statements were true by the White House about preparing for martial law. And I want you to let them know that if there is any terrorism, we know who to blame. The point is, if any terrorism comes, it's from this government. And if there was an outside threat like a bin Laden, who was a known CIA asset in the 80s, running the Mujahideen war, and whose family builds all the military bases over in Saudi Arabia right now, and sits on the board of Iridium Satellite. He's the boogeyman they need in this Orwellian phony system. A big part of the solution, after you research all the government terrorism and check out what I'm saying is true, call the White House and tell them, we know the government's planning terrorism. We know Oklahoma City and World Trade Center was terrorism. We know the Joint Chiefs of Staff wanted to blow up airliners, Baltimore Sun. If you do it, we're going to blame you because we know who's up to it. Or if you let some terrorist group do it, like the World Trade Center, we know who to blame. And you could save the planet.
And as you'll see, he was hardly the only person who had prior knowledge. And we can be assured that Osama bin Laden did not call up the government officials and some of the other people who had prior knowledge. An interesting story was there was a woman named Christina Gallagher, who is a modern-day prophet, who was giving a talk on the Virgin Mary in Lower Manhattan. And as she came out of her hotel, someone from her group pointed up to the Twin Towers and said, "Aren't those a beautiful example of architecture and engineering?" And she responded that they would be a pile of rubble because of our greed and arrogance. That day was September 11th, 1999. Now I sent out 4 packets of information on September 10th, 2001 about the times that we're living in. 2 overseas and 2 to local groups in the U.S. As you see, the bill came to $6.66. And that's really what this is all about. The devil. There's a picture of his face in one of the clouds that formed after one of the planes crashed into the towers. And as Anne Graham Lott, Billy Graham's daughter, said, what do we expect? We kick God out of our lives, out of our schools, out of our country. Some people even say he's dead. Well, he's very much alive. There was another prophecy written over 400 years ago by Nostradamus. He was the #1 search on the internet right after September 11th because they made up some verses. But there was more than one verse about September 11th. When I went to Ceylon province right after September 11th, the curator, who recognized me from 1999, said he did not predict September 11th. And I said, he most surely did. And I picked up this book, which was right next to her. I opened it up and said, read this. And as you can see right here, the first 2 verses say, the beard, black and frizzy, through aircraft, shall come to subjugate a nation, cruel and proud. The key word in there for aircraft is engine. The modern French word for guided missile is engine teleguide. And as you see from the dictionary here, up on the screen, one of the meanings for the word engine is aircraft. There was also one more piece of information you might be interested in. The Vatican received a list of some new laws that will be implemented upon the earth. One is that there will be no more militaries, air forces, armies, navies by any nation. This will also fulfill a prophecy in Isaiah that we will not teach war to our children anymore. Just like 800 years ago, when the people forced their leaders to sign the Magna Carta for some basic rights, we will have to come together to stop the New World Order. So now, let's take a look at the evidence as overwhelming of prior knowledge and government involvement.
You've seen the evidence of government-sponsored terrorism throughout history. Now let's take a closer look at what happened on September 11th, 2001, and how it's being used to usher in a new world order.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
The Council on Foreign Relations, known as the CFR, an organization publicly sworn to destroy American national sovereignty and usher in a tyrannical world police state, could not contain their glee on September 12th, the day after the tragic attack. They announced their new world order.
There is a chance for the President of the United States to use this disaster to carry out what his father, a phrase his father used, I think, only once, and hasn't been used since, and that is a new world order.
A special televised meeting of the New York-based Council on Foreign Relations provides a window to the real story. The speaker, Vice President Dick Cheney, takes a question from David Rockefeller.
Vice President, I just enjoyed so much your whole speech, but I was particularly pleased that you gave such a strong endorsement for the free trade agreement for all the Americas, subject that has been of great concern to me for many years, and particularly recently, and I think it's absolutely essential for the strength of our economy.
Rockefeller's role in the drive for an FTAA was a lot more central than he portrays. Rockefeller cultivated Latin American leaders who could be counted on to support such a proposal. Both the 1994 Miami Summit and the FTAA proposal were conceived and nurtured by a Rockefeller-created network. Prominent among the organizations sponsoring the Miami event, the Council of the Americas, founder and honorary chairman, David Rockefeller. The Americas Society, chairman, David Rockefeller. The Forum of the Americas, founder, David Rockefeller. The Institute for International Economics, financial backer and board member, David Rockefeller. The Trilateral Commission, founder and honorary chairman, David Rockefeller. Rockefeller's influence also extends to the current administration. He was chairman emeritus of the CFR when Vice President Dick Cheney once served as a director, a relationship that Cheney concealed during his congressional career.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
I personally talked to a member of the CFR after he gave a talk at a college in Cincinnati, where he said their goal was to bring about the New World Order. And here, from David Rockefeller's own memoir, on page 405, here's what he has to say about it. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. I think that says it all, in his own words.
There it is, the CFR actually admitting that this crisis was helping them to bring in a new world order, global government. And how would they get that job done? You see, for decades, going back to Jimmy Carter and Zbigniew Brzezinski, the national security advisor, they had been breeding, creating these terrorist organizations, funding them and training them to attack America. Zbigniew Brzezinski, co-founder of the Trilateral Commission with David Rockefeller and other luminaries of the global system, actually bragged in his 1998 book, these criminals love to brag, The Grand Chessboard, of how America would be attacked by Afghan terrorists and how global government, a war for global government, would then take place in Central Asia. How it could be used to roll out national ID cards and a global police state here in the United States. All of this being planned back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The relationship between the CIA and the Afghan freedom fighters, the Mujahideen, even predates Ronald Reagan. The bonds that were forged there with the Central Intelligence Agency led to the creation of their super asset, Osama bin Laden, the rich Saudi Arabian sheik whose family to this day builds all U.S. military bases in the Middle East, North Africa, and in Central Asia. It's on the record that bin Laden's a CIA asset, and every time an American president needs a distraction overseas, a ship or an embassy gets blown up. On October 12, 1998, the USS Cole, while docked at the port of Aden in Yemen, was attacked. 17 Americans were killed, 39 wounded. Sacrifice yet again on the altar of globalism. Just like clockwork, every time Bill Clinton was in trouble, an embassy, a ship, a barracks was blown up. Just like Oklahoma City, the CIA asset bin Laden was delivering time and time again, and Bill Clinton was there protecting him, refusing to allow foreign countries like Sudan, even Iraq, and Afghanistan to give them the files of where Al-Qaeda was in the world, and yes, where they were active even in the continental United States. Sudan even offered to arrest bin Laden 3 separate times. Bill Clinton answered by bombing with state-of-the-art cruise missiles their only pharmaceutical plant. Denying Africa desperately needed medicines. You see, in reality, it's a lot bigger than just Republican or Democrat. The reality is the Central Intelligence Agency, controlled by Wall Street, has been grooming this creature and his family over the last 50 years to carry out dangerous projects in the Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa. Back in 1996, the CIA worked in tandem with Pakistan to create the Taliban. Then in 1998, when the Afghans offered to arrest bin Laden, the CIA responded, publicly telling him to do no such thing. They needed this boogeyman for one more big action, and his family the entire time was being rewarded with giant satellite company deals, oil company mergers, and some of the biggest construction projects in the world.
New world coming. America will become increasingly vulnerable to hostile attack on our homeland, and our military superiority will not entirely protect us. Americans will likely die on American soil, possibly in large numbers. Americans will likely die on American soil, possibly in large numbers.
Shortly after September 11th, witnesses came forward documenting that bin Laden had actually met and planned the September 11th attacks with the CIA for 10 days in Dubai in an American Army hospital. French intelligence was so upset by what they had learned that they actually got media reports published before September 11th, specifically warning that bin Laden was planning to hijack aircraft and fly them into tall buildings in downtown Manhattan, as well as the Pentagon. Of course, the Pentagon, the Defense Department, didn't need to be warned. First media reports that came out said that 5 of the hijackers had been trained at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. Later media reports in the Pensacola News-Journal confirmed that 3 of the hijackers had been trained at the Pensacola Naval Air Station 2 years before September 11th. The San Francisco Chronicle also reported that one of the top lieutenants of Al-Qaeda was actually an FBI asset, not to mention a member of the U.S. Army. The next piece of evidence you're about to see is the biggest smoking gun of them all. President George W. Bush signed Presidential Decision Directive W199I, telling FBI agents as well as defense intelligence officers that if they tried to stop Al-Qaeda, they would be arrested under national security implications. It's been in every publication from the Wall Street Journal to the Washington Times. Actual lawsuits have now been filed by FBI agents who are outraged by the fact that they were not allowed to stop Al-Qaeda. The global crime syndicate that George W. Bush and his family fronts for has everything to gain from the September 11th attacks: a national ID card, a national control grid, a cashless society. It's part of the public record. George Bush signed the documents threatening Defense Intelligence and FBI agents with arrest if they stopped al-Qaeda. This is the most absolutely treasonous, treacherous thing he could possibly do. George Bush is a mass murderer. Before the Bush administration shut him down, CNN's American Morning with Paula Zahn actually reported that FBI Deputy Director John O'Neill resigned because he felt the U.S. administration was obstructing the FBI and their attempt to stop al-Qaeda. They went on to report that Bush signed W199I, restricting the investigation. Again, this is high treason, absolute fact. George Bush signed this public document. BBC has a copy of it, and George Bush is an intimate partner with bin Laden, a traitor to America. Months before September 11, 2001, Indian as well as Pakistani diplomats had gone public with the fact that U.S. Special Forces were massing in Tajikistan, preparing for a full-scale invasion of Afghanistan. So the U.S. government was massing troops outside Afghanistan, publicly getting ready for an invasion right before September 11th. Another smoking gun, another red flag. We already talked about the Deputy FBI Director, John O'Neill, quitting because George Bush signed an order not allowing him to stop al-Qaeda. You're probably wondering, why doesn't he go public now? Well, there's a problem. Mr. O'Neill is dead. His new job was working as the head of security for the World Trade Center complex, and he died in the collapse of September 11th, his first day on the job. Marvin Bush running security on the complex, and of course his contract, by the way, ended on the morning of 9/11. So that's another interesting facet to all of this. None of it adds up. But guess who ran security on these buildings? Marvin Bush, brother of the president, son of the former president, or the former CIA director. Marvin Bush ran security for this whole complex. And guess when his 2-year contract ended? This is the Associated Press on September 11th. And where did the media pick up on this story? From Barbara Bush's own memoir, Reflections. She wrote about it in the book. Or did you know that it's admitted fact that public officials, federal, state, and local across the land, were called by the White House in the days before 9/11 and told not to fly to New York on the day of September 11th? Mayor Willie Brown of San Francisco was called by the White House and told, don't fly to New York on the morning of September 11th. He was called September 10th. September 12, 2001, San Francisco Chronicle reported that Mayor Willie Brown was warned by the federal government not to fly on September 11th. He was warned the evening before. Now, of course, under pressure from the White House, Willie Brown refuses to say exactly what federal agency warned him, just that he was warned not to fly on September 11th. I wish the rest of the American people would have gotten that warning. But of course, if the American people would have been warned, then the government terrorist attack wouldn't have had its desired effect. Ashcroft, the Attorney General, just a few weeks before September 11th, stopped flying commercial, citing a hijacker risk. Most shocking of all, the Joint Chiefs of Staff had a scheduled meeting in New York City on September 11th. But the day before, because of a, quote, warning, they canceled their trip to New York City. They even told MSNBC this. But it's still somewhat of a public secret. The only airlift. Seymour Hersh first broke the story at the New Yorker magazine about the airlift of evil. It was then picked up by major publications, but, well, forgotten into the memory hole. At the end of the 3-week-long Afghan war in Afghanistan, 8,000 Taliban and al-Qaeda leaders were loaded on U.S. government C-130s and flown out to Pakistan to safety. It had been their job to stir up the phony crisis in Afghanistan and then give George W. the fake victory. You see, it was a staged war. And this is one of the other big smoking guns of 9/11 government involvement that we're all supposed to forget about. Oh, the government admits they flew him out to safety, but Fox News said it was an accident. Yes, 8,000 Taliban and al-Qaeda cream, the leaders, being flown out to safety. And top generals were told to release Taliban generals. They were told, let them go. And some of the generals got angry and went public. Then there were the media reports by respected institutions backed up by hospital officials at the American hospital in Dubai, Pakistan, of Osama bin Laden meeting with the CIA Middle East section chief for 10 days in July of 2001, months before September 11th. The question is, what was the CIA doing meeting with Osama bin Laden? getting their story straight.
Hey, Michael, why don't you talk about NORAD standing down? Why don't you talk about NORAD standing down, Michael? Why not the really hardcore 9/11 issues?
Michael Moore and the controlled opposition like him may be afraid to even scratch the surface of 9/11, but we're not. We're going to go to the rock bottom of this horrible event and expose who truly perpetrated it, because the future of America and free humanity hangs in the balance.
How many of you know that NORAD stood down for over an hour and 25 minutes, but if your Cessna gets off course for 5 minutes, they're going to launch F-16s on you? Remember Payne Stewart, the golfer? 15 minutes after his jet got off track, they had F-16s all around him. But on 9/11, in the most controlled airspace in the world, they could do nothing about 4 jets. But it gets worse. Guess why NORAD stood down? The average people in the military are good folks. They were told it was a drill, because the Associated Press reported, and the CIA's own website admits, that on the morning of 9/11, the CIA was running a drill of flying hijacked jets into the World Trade Center and Pentagon. It was just a coincidence. At 8:30 in the morning, there was a drill.
The North American Aerospace Defense Command is charged with defending North America's airspace. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, Vice President Dick Cheney was in control of NORAD. This was the first time in U.S. history that a president or vice president was in direct control of the military agency. NORAD was founded in 1957, and generals always had the power to shoot down or intercept hijacked aircraft. But on June 1st, 2001, just 3 months before 9/11, Dick Cheney ordered Donald Rumsfeld to allow him to take control of NORAD itself and the shoot-down procedure, and remove that power from the generals so they could do nothing. Here is a copy of the memorandum from Rumsfeld to the Joint Chiefs, telling them they no longer have any authority. An Associated Press article in August of 2002 reported that the CIA just so happened to be running a drill on the morning of 9/11 of flying jets in the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Then senior FAA officials ordered air traffic controllers to shred the tapes from 9/11 in violation of federal law. AP learned of the drills because at a Homeland Security function after 9/11, they bragged about it. Oh, we had foresight. We were running drills that very morning. Then USA Today reported that drills held weeks before 9/11 included targets that were the Pentagon and World Trade Center.
And on Monday, that Zogby poll was released that showed 50% of New York City residents believe the government had foreknowledge and made a conscious decision not to intervene. 50% of the people who live in New York believe that. Well, it's time for a serious investigation.
Then CNN conducted its own poll on Anderson Cooper's program 360. After an hour-long show where he and others demonized members of the 9/11 skeptics movement, they conducted their own poll, and an amazing 90% of respondents out of over 7,000 believe that there was a U.S. government cover-up.
All of the people involved in the cover-up of September 11th have gotten wealthy off of it or gotten even richer. And then now September 11th is being used to kill our freedoms, to destroy what America is built on, what America is supposed to really be about.
Most of my friends have questions about what happened on 9/11, and we'd like to know answers, and we're very disappointed in President Bush's reaction to 9/11.
My name is Les. I live here in New York City, and I'm part of a contingent that has vigils here at Ground Zero every Saturday. We've been doing it since January, actually. And I've seen a lot of interesting things, heard a lot of interesting things from people. A few just happened today. A woman came up saying that her family received a phone call from a family friend. She was told by this family friend on September 10th, the family friend was a Navy SEAL, told not to show up in Lower Manhattan tomorrow, which was, of course, the 11th. There's going to be a major event.
MSNBC investigated the hundreds of reports of individuals in the towers being told not to go to work that day or being told to get out early that morning. And they found out that, yes, it was not an urban legend. It was true. They found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of witnesses. And then the Israeli instant messaging company, Odago, admitted publicly, told Haaretz, one of the biggest papers in Israel, that yes, they got a warning and instant messaged hundreds of their employees in the towers and told them to leave the building 4 hours before the planes slammed into it. This is on the record and cannot be ignored. Students pointed up at the towers and told their school teachers in the weeks before 9/11 that those buildings are about to come down. They're about to be destroyed. And then on top of this, we have the public officials being warned. Total evidence of prior knowledge.
Some people appear to have known the imminent future on that fateful day. FEMA had arrived in New York on Monday night, ready for a bioterror drill. Spokesman Tom Kenny to Dan Rather.
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site other than the spot at Church and Day to which we were deployed.
And Rudy Giuliani, mayor of New York, tells ABC's Peter Jennings that he was aware the towers would be coming down.
What is going on now is a massive rescue effort.
Do you believe it's hundreds or thousands?
I really don't. I really don't want to say right now, Peter. I think it's going to be a horrible number. I saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. I saw some of the firefighters who I know going into the building. And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10-15 minutes. And we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. The World Trade Center was going to collapse. It was going to collapse. It was going to collapse.
Listen as George Bush tells us that he was watching a live video feed from a camera aimed at the World Trade Center.
And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to wonder exactly what President George W. Bush knew about the attack, and when he knew it. According to the official White House version, it was at this moment in a Florida classroom that Bush learned the second plane had hit the World Trade Center and that the U.S. was under attack. But here's what George Bush himself said almost 3 months later when asked about September 11th.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And I said it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there and didn't have much time to think about it.
Now wait a minute. George Bush was told about the second plane while he was inside the classroom. So you just heard him describe seeing the first plane crash on television that day. But that's impossible. No one saw the first plane crash on TV on September the 11th because the videotape of it didn't surface until the next day. So how could George Bush have seen what he said he saw?
This is the video that the rest of us saw. The key question is, why was George Bush watching a live feed from a camera aimed at the World Trade Center exactly when the first plane hit? Because they wanted to watch their plan unfold, like an arsonist watching the building he torched burn to the ground.
While we were in New York, we talked to dozens of eyewitnesses who had been personally warned themselves but were afraid to come public. Some have been told to keep their mouths shut.
I was a rescue worker. I will say that I spoke to a cop on 9/11 who said that it was going to come down. I don't know how he knew that. He did tell me before it happened, before the fact that it was coming down.
The widows from the police department and the fire department were standing at the new school and back for the 2 days, and they were screaming at the media, please pay attention. We got phone calls. We listened that their husbands or their children were saying there's explosives coming on like the 23rd, 26th floor before the buildings went down. And the media started laughing and said, we have no time to hear you.
There's been an almost total media blackout on the fact that most of the 9/11 victims' families are angry at the government and believe that they had prior knowledge or were involved. But they couldn't cover it up when families came to New York for the 9/11 Commission and got in Giuliani's face.
Question. Let's ask some real questions. Is that unfair? And what about the bunker? You didn't ask him about the bunker, the Office of Emergency Management bunker on fire?
We are getting ready for the next panel.
Remember this. Your government funded and trained Al-Qaeda. Repeat it again. Your government funded and trained Al-Qaeda. 3,000 people murdered does not
we
leadership.
thank you
It's a vacuum
very
of
much for
leadership.
your
Let
help,
us
your
ask
leadership,
some real questions
and
already.
your cooperation.
He said on PBS, he said, we pulled the building. PBS.
Oh, yeah, he pulled the building.
Pelted by debris when the North Tower collapsed, 7 burned until late afternoon, allowing occupants to evacuate to safety.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Yeah, he said we're going to pull. He said we're going to pull the building. Silverstein said we're going to pull the building.
And we got the firemen saying they pulled it. I mean, Silverstein goes on PBS and says it, and we're the weirdos when he says it on TV. Unbelievable.
Let's see that one more time.
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
It takes demolition experts weeks to prepare for the destruction of a building. How do they do it on 9/11 in just a few hours? In the tragic days after 9/11, many prominent engineers across the world went public and said there's no way that fire destroyed any of those buildings. It's never happened to a modern building. Buildings have burned for 6-7 days before, and it hasn't happened. The answer was hidden in plain view. Larry Silverstein went on PBS and said that they had pulled the building, demolition term for destroying it. In fact, the local public radio station was told that they were going to demolish Building 7. But since then, the public has been told to be quiet, not to ask questions. And the government hasn't even given us an official story of why Building 7 fell. They say they think fire caused it to fall. And in case you're wondering what pull it means, here's another example, where they again use the term pull it to mean controlled demolition of buildings. Months after 9/11, the remains of 4, 5, and 6 were destroyed. Here's a clip from the same PBS documentary, where the head of engineering for the city of New York describes pull it as a controlled demolition.
By mid-December, the Department of Design and Construction had leveled World Trade Center buildings 4 and 5.
Hello? Oh, we're getting ready to pull Building 6.
We have to be very careful how we demolish Building 6. We were worried about the Building 6 coming down and then damaging the slurry wall, so we wanted that particular building to fall within a certain area.
There's a certain excitement in the air of bringing the last structure down at the World Trade Center.
Seconds after 7 collapsed, this is what Dan Rather had to say about it.
Large building. In most other cities, it'd be one of the largest buildings in town, probably. Trade Center Building 7 has collapsed. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before when A building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Just in case you missed it, here it is again.
Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Though this New York Times article tells us Building 7 burned like a giant torch, the only visuals that exist are of unidentified smoke and a few small fires. Compare this to the wallops sustained by World Trade Center 3, 4, 5, and 6. Positioned right below the towers, damage to the surrounding World Trade Center buildings was infinitely worse. Still, the structures held up. But somehow, rescue workers knew that Building 7 would fall.
You hear that? You're in that building. It'll be coming down soon.
A 47-story skyscraper, Building 7 folded neatly in 6.5 seconds. A textbook descent right into its footprint. Silverstein Properties now tells us that its owner was referring to the team of firefighters inside the building when he spoke of the decision to pulling the firemen out of harm's way. However, there were no firefighters in Building 7, according to FEMA, NIST, and Fire Chief Frank Bellini. They were ordered out at 11:30 that morning. 6 hours later, the building came down.
You know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. And, you know, it was horrifying. About a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that.
This is a photo taken 1 second into Building 7's collapse. Notice the crimp. If we look at other controlled demolitions, we see that they first blow one of the central columns so the building falls in on itself. If you don't do this, the building falls outward and has a wider collapse radius and can damage surrounding structures. This was not the case with Building 7. Building 7 had a classic crimp or wedge. Its central column was blown out first, so it didn't structurally damage buildings just a few feet away from it.
Building 7, while I was listening to live feed from our local public radio station later in the afternoon, they talked about Building 7. Building 7 was fine. There was no airplane that hit it. And then they even began to ruminate on the air about demolishing the building. I said, well, I don't know. I mean, you can put out fires. You know, why would you talk about demolishing a building that, you know, it wasn't hit by anything? You know, the fires weren't bad or anything like that.
What was in Building 7? Well, the Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, FEMA, U.S. Secret Service, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the city's main command bunker, overseeing the entire operation. That's what was in Building 7, a structure that was over-engineered, that could stand thousands and thousands and thousands of degrees of temperature for days if need be. But it collapsed in just a few seconds. You know, it's interesting to note that Larry Silverstein bought this building many, many years ago. This was the only building he bought in the complex. But 2 months before 9/11, he bought the entire complex, all 7 buildings, and took out a record insurance policy on them for over $3 billion, which he's now been paid. In fact, he tried to get even more. He wanted $7 billion on an original $200 million investment that they made on the entire complex when he leased the whole structure. Mr. Silverstein did quite nicely in the command center for Rudolph Giuliani was in this building. Rudolph Giuliani had his command bunker in this structure, and so did the CIA. It wasn't just the city of New York. The CIA, the FBI were all based in this building. And Rudolph Giuliani told ABC News that he got a call that morning about 8 hours before this collapse, before a fire even started, and was told, get out of Building 7. And he left to a FEMA command base that had already been set up the night before, which he's now admitted in congressional testimony, right down the street by the harbor. A lot of interesting timing. And since 9/11, Giuliani's gone into the terror fighting business, and he's made hundreds of millions of dollars with Giuliani and Associates. Interesting. Then you have the firefighters telling Associated Press reporters to get back, to get away from the building, that Building 7 was about to come down. And then it magically did come down. And then the University of New York and the U.S. Geological Survey, federal and state, both seismographs picked up explosions going off, the classical pattern of a controlled demolition. There has been over 100 uncontrolled fires in skyscrapers in the last 50 years, and never has one collapsed or come close to collapsing from fire. Only earthquakes and demolitions have brought these modern structures down. Then we look at the fires in Building 7, and they would be called moderate by any firefighting manual, but still the building collapsed. Building 7 had sporadic fires in it for 6 hours. Other skyscrapers, as we mentioned, have burned for days or even weeks. Why don't they collapse? Because steel doesn't begin to weaken until after 2,000 degrees of temperature. Around 2,500 it becomes red hot, and at around 3,000 degrees starts to melt. Another example of this was the Windsor building in Madrid, Spain in mid-February of 2005. It burned for 2 days at temperatures much higher, with white-hot flames shooting out of it for hundreds of feet. As we watched the Windsor building burn, I was amazed to watch the media of the world say, well, the World Trade Center towers and Building 7 fell from fire, so it's going to fall. We're just waiting for the collapse. But the collapse never came. All the major support pillars held fast. Steel doesn't melt at that temperature. According to official reports, Building 7 wasn't even in the debris field of Tower 1 and 2. And that's why it's important to look at buildings like Bankers Trust. We already talked about it earlier, but let's focus in on it with some detail. It was right up against the South Tower, only about 45 feet away, and large chunks of the South Tower fell directly in to Bankers Trust. But Bankers Trust is like all other modern steel buildings. It's like the big building in Madrid, Spain. Despite the fact that fires raged through many of its floors and that huge pieces of debris fell on top of it and up against it, it didn't collapse. The architect of the World Trade Center towers, Nomura Yamasaki, told the press many times before 9/11 that he specifically designed the towers to take massive passenger jetliner impacts. The construction and project manager for the World Trade Center complex, Frank DiMartini, told the press multiple times that they designed the towers not to just take one large jetliner impact, but at least 2, and not collapse. And other world-renowned engineers and architects went public as well, but that didn't matter for the mainstream media. They simply ignored their protest. Senior firefighter Lou Caccioli, who survived the collapse of the World Trade Centers, reported that bombs were clearly going off inside the structure. He told People magazine this the day after 9/11. When we spoke to him, he said he couldn't talk about it. Professor Van Ramiro, Vice President for Research at New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, told the Albuquerque Journal that the implosions of the towers were too mathematical to be a chance result of airplanes, and that only controlled demolitions could have brought the buildings down. Then Kevin Ryan, an executive engineer with Underwriters Laboratories, or UL, that certifies most big buildings in America, went public and said, "It's impossible. Jet fuel wouldn't have melted the columns in Tower 1 and 2. This is from the organization that underwrote the towers. Then Firefighter Engineering, the oldest engineering publication in United States history, went public and said, there's no way jet fuel made that happen. And stop hauling away the debris. Stop covering up the crime scene. We've got 7 different tapes showing different groups of firefighters saying the towers looked like they were brought down by bombs and that they heard explosions. But in the interest of time, here is just one of those clips shot by 2 French brothers who were making a documentary about New York firefighters on the morning of 9/11.
We came down, it was much worse than it was when we went up. Yeah. Right? We went up and they had everything set up. We came down, it was desolate. It was like, holy shit.
We came down to the lobby. It was like the first thing that was. There was nobody there. What did we do? We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
detonated. If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Pat,
Matt,
can you hear me?
if we are, yes, I can, Matt. Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department, who was obviously one of the first people here on the scene after those two planes were crashed into the side, we assume, of the World Trade Center towers, which used to be behind me over there. Chief Albert Turry told me that he was here just literally 10 or 15 minutes after the events that took place this morning. That is the first crash. He had roughly 10 alarms, roughly 200 men in the building trying to effect rescues of some of those civilians who were in there, and that basically he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. The second device, he speculates, was probably planted in the building. So that's what we have been told by Albert Turry, who is the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He told me that just moments ago.
And a CBS News chopper in the air over the towers reported the same thing.
If Jim Smith is with us still in chopper 2, Jimmy, you there?
Just, we saw some kind of explosion, a lot of smoke come out at the top of the tower, and then it collapsed down onto the streets below, much like we saw the first tower just about a half hour ago.
Chopper 2 as he takes these pictures. Jim?
Yes, I am here, Michael.
Jim, tell us what's happening out there.
We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion on the World Trade Center #2, the one
secondary.
We've all unfortunately seen the famous photos of victims jumping out of Tower 1 and 2, but that happened in the first 15 minutes while the jet fuel was still burning. Later, we have the photographs of the victims standing in the impact holes from the aircraft begging for help for 20 to 30 minutes. How could they survive heat that would melt through giant 4-foot steel girders? The answer is they couldn't, and the firefighters are on record as saying the fires were almost out. The fact is, the temperatures had dropped dramatically. The fires were almost extinguished. The people were in the open wounds in the sides of the buildings begging for help. Help that did come in the form of the valiant firefighters who had the buildings blown up around them. The tape you're about to hear is from the grave, as a valiant firefighter reports that the fires were almost out. And as firefighters went public and said that the fires had almost been extinguished, the federal government ordered them under national security to stop talking to the public and told the media that all the firefighter tapes had malfunctioned, but not before firefighters had rebelled and released segments of tape, a segment you're about to hear.
What do you got up there, Steve? I'm still in Boy Stairway, 74th floor, no smoke or fire problem. The walls are breached, so be careful. Yeah, 10-4, I saw that on 68. Freddie, come on over. Freddie, come on over by us. Hey, Ronnie, 415. We got tons. I saw the pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. Where you go that? 78th floor, numerous 1045 coal lines. What's scaring you, Mario?
Seconds before the towers collapsed, blast points could be seen springing up down the sides of the buildings from the top down. Within days of 9/11, Bush and his minions began grandstanding at Ground Zero, telling us, "Give up your liberties and we'll protect you. Go along with our invasion of the world and everything will be okay." Then there were all the pre-9/11 warnings from the French, the British, the Egyptians, the Italians, the Russians, the Israelis, the Indians. The list goes on and on, but Condoleezza Rice and George Bush told us they'd never heard of such a plan of al-CIA to fly hijacked jets into the World Trade Center and Pentagon. It didn't matter if CNN had reported on it back in 1995. Even the Taliban, 2 months before 9/11, said, "Stop Osama, he's about to attack you." The Project for New American Century, founded back in 1996 by 25 neocons, Dick Cheney, Jeb Bush, Paul Wolfowitz, all of these people
said on their own website, in publications, we need, quote, helpful Pearl Harbor events. I don't think Pearl Harbor was helpful, but we need a terrorist attack on the order of Pearl Harbor to get the American people behind a war.
Hijacked aircraft headed towards New York.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise manifest.
And now respected rescue workers who worked the World Trade Center site say that they found 3 of the 4 data recorders and were ordered to load them on FBI vehicles and keep their mouths shut. Why would the feds want to cover up what was on those recorders? Thousands of years ago, when a crime was committed in Rome, the judges would ask one question, qui bono, or who stands to gain, who profits? And when we look at 9/11, the answer is clear. Let's look at what the Bush family was doing in the days before 9/11 and on 9/11, and it's quite revealing. Marvin Bush was in New York City running security for the World Trade Center complex. Former President Bush was in D.C. at the Ritz-Carlton for a Carlyle Group function, sitting at the head table with the head of the bin Laden family. 2 days before 9/11, Governor of Florida, Jeb Bush, declared unprecedented martial law in Florida. He didn't make the announcement until September 11th. Then we have the CIA-controlled head of Pakistani intelligence, General Ahmad Ahmed, arriving in Washington, D.C. on September 13th, just days after he wired, the New York Times admits, $100,000 to the supposed lead hijacker, Mohammed Atta. For the week he was here, preceding 9/11, he met with CIA Director George Tenet, the heads of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, Porter Goss and Senator Graham. By the way, Porter Goss has now been made head of the CIA. On the morning of 9/11, he was actually having breakfast with Senator Bob Graham and Porter Goss. What is the money man behind Mohammed Atta doing meeting with all the intelligence heads? In the days after 9/11, the public was told that we were going to be able to catch whoever was behind September 11th because they had engaged in record put options against American and United Airlines. But when the money trail led back to CIA-controlled companies headed up by people like Buzzy Krongard, number 3 at the CIA, the story was dropped like a hot potato. But that doesn't stop Buzzy from still going public and defending people like Osama bin Laden. He's told the Times of London and many other publications that we should just leave Osama bin Laden alone. Let him go free, that we've got a problem if we want to capture him. Prominent people across the world have been exposing the 9/11 cover-up. Michael Meacher, the number 3 man in the Blair government, wrote a huge editorial for the London Guardian titled "The War on Terror is Bogus," and he pointed out that NORAD stood down on 9/11. He wrote about the Project for a New American Century, run by Jeb Bush and Dick Cheney, years before 9/11, saying that they needed a helpful terrorist attack to get the American people behind their war for empire. Meacher concluded his article by saying, if the U.S. government didn't engineer the attacks, they certainly knew about it. Andres von Bülow was German defense minister and German technology minister. I interviewed him on my syndicated radio program, and he said there's no way Al-Qaeda carried out these attacks. Only the military-industrial complex could pull it off. But here's one of the biggest pieces of evidence. You all heard them say that a paper passport fell out of one of the towers and was picked up by a police officer on the street. This plane flies into the building, explodes with jet fuel out of the guy's jacket, goes through the fireball, through the side of the plane, out of the burning building, out of the fire shooting out, and comes down to the ground unscathed. But something happened. For 6 months, they reported they had this passport. Boy, we've got it. We've got the proof. And then the guy stood up and was alive in the Middle East, and they pulled it and said, oh, that was a mistake. He wasn't a hijacker, and the story just disappeared of the passport.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
I guess it's un-American to investigate the facts. Let's just call it a conspiracy theory, especially those FBI agents that have gone public about George Bush telling him not to stop Al-Qaeda.
Conspiracy theories, conspiracy theories.
We have plenty of evidence that the attack on Afghanistan was planned because after the negotiations with the Taliban broke down in the United States, I think they went to Houston in Texas in about July, and there were later discussions at about this time in Berlin. where US officials made absolutely clear to the Taliban representatives in this famous phrase, either we will provide you with a carpet of gold, in other words, if you supply a pipeline across Afghanistan, you ensure the security of the country, you guard that pipeline, then we can do a deal with you, otherwise we will bury you in a carpet of bombs.
Conspiracy theories.
National polls show that most Americans and Westerners believe the official story of 9/11 to be a fraud. And a large part of that majority believes that 9/11 was an inside job. But the establishment press continues to contest any alternative view concerning 9/11.
But I think that, you know, what happened to a time in this country when we were entitled, when we had a constitutional and a God-given right to be curious about things that didn't make sense. That's all it was.
Because we have a lot of cable shows now, and thank you. And they need stuff to be mad about. So, you know, stuff like this is like, oh boy, we could yell about this for an entire week. And plus, with your dad being the president and all, it puts a lot of the focus on it.
That's true. Yeah, I should have conferred with him before I came out publicly. You know?
Within weeks of Charlie Sheen throwing down the gauntlet on national television, the federal government released 2 new videos, almost identical to frames released 4 years before by the Pentagon.
We've got to ask questions about why the Pentagon could be attacked. This is supposed to be the most defended building in the world. We've got to look at the stills that were released from video footage of that day, which claim that a jetliner went into the side of the Pentagon and yet appear to show some kind of guided missile going in there.
The establishment press chortled with glee, as if the new footage conclusively proved their claims.
Tonight's other big story, the Pentagon releasing the first video showing American Airlines Flight 77 crashing into the Pentagon on September 11th. Well, that's a question. Does this prove once and for all that that is where that airplane crashed?
Well, I would have thought that over the years that was never a question, but some folks had a question about that. I think that question is now once and for all answered.
Of 2006, the big brouhaha was the Pentagon was releasing extra footage, extra frames from those security cameras, and Kira Phillips was interviewing Jamie McIntyre as they were getting ready for the release of this video footage. Again, this is last year, and she asked him about the people that believe something else hit the Pentagon and that Flight 77 didn't go there. Here was his response.
Been there on September 11th, having seen the plane wreckage and photographed it myself personally, I can tell you that that's nonsense.
All right, so he said anybody that doesn't believe it was Flight 77, he says that's nonsense. He also went on to say,
I had a camera with me. I took pictures of some of the wreckage, some of the parts of the fuselage, of part of the cockpit, until they told us we had to move back away from the scene.
Okay, now you just heard him say he had a camera. He took pictures of parts of the cockpit of the fuselage. Now we turn the clock back to September 11th and Jamie McIntyre reporting live at the Pentagon with this report.
You know, it might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
Since the first days of 9/11, the establishment press has only focused on the Pentagon controversy and not the hundreds of other smoking guns and serious questions that have been raised. We have to ask ourselves, why? As if it was by design, the new frames only intensified the debate. No passenger plane is evident in the still frames. They're more than happy to endlessly focus on the Pentagon, but they won't touch Building 7.
Now, a few final pieces of evidence concerning Building Number 7. Here's a BBC reporter reporting on the collapse of the building about 30 minutes before it actually does. You can see the building standing in the background. You have to ask yourself, how did she know?
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago, I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York, behind me, down by the World Trade Centers, of just an area completely closed off as the rescue workers try to do their job. But this isn't the first building that has suffered as a result. We know that part of the Marriott Hotel next to the World Trade Center also collapsed as a result of this huge amount of falling debris from 110 floors of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Here's a final look at the World Trade Center footprint from the 9/11 Commission report. Note that buildings 5 and 6, which are between the North Tower, number 1, and building number 7, did not fall down. Now let's look at what happened to the Marriott Hotel, which is building number 3, and is located right next to the two twin towers. Look at the damage it sustained when the towers fell. Yet it did not completely collapse, but building number 7 magically fell symmetrically in on itself.
Why Building 7? Let's ask the question again. As the WTC Command Center, was it the hub for the 9/11 plan? Also, in 6.5 seconds, lost forever were thousands of SEC case files on corporate fraud, including those relating to the notorious activities of giants WorldCom and Enron. A few indictments for stock fraud, but what of the $70 billion California electricity swindle? It disappeared. Silverstein, a commercial real estate tycoon with international political connections, acquired a 99-year lease on the World Trade Center complex in the spring of 2001. Throughout the summer, he reworked the insurance policies on his new property, making sure that it was covered for acts of terrorism. Explicit in the lease agreement was Silverstein's right to rebuild the complex if it were destroyed. After 9/11, Mr. Silverstein fought his insurers in court to obtain double his policy limits for the destruction of his property, maintaining that the double hijacking constituted 2 disasters caused by terrorists, not just one.
My first reaction is to think about families of those people, the tragedy, the magnitude of it. However, I firmly believe that we should rebuild.
It is time for a real investigation into what happened on 9/11/2001. Then, 911 days later, what a coincidence, there was a bombing in Madrid. Here's a brief look into the facts of that case.
To understand the London bombers and who perpetrated them, you first need to look at 3/11/2004, the bombings in Madrid, Spain. Years after the blast that rocked trains in the city of Madrid, Spain, the government admits that Al-Qaeda had no connection to the attacks. Every one of the supposed bombers had intimate links to the Spanish security services, including the head of their bomb squad. The alleged leader of the bombers, who reportedly gave dynamite to the terrorists, was connected to the Madrid bomb squad. And we see the exact same earmarks, the same MO in the London bombings that we witnessed in Madrid. On the morning of July 7th, 2005, 3 trains and a city bus were ripped to pieces when 4 military-grade explosive devices detonated. At 8:50 a.m., 3 explosive devices simultaneously detonated on 3 separate trains. Then mysteriously, 50 minutes into the attack, the London Police Department orders the number 30 Hackney to Marble Arch bus to leave its normal route and to park at the corner of Woburn Square and Tavistock Place. At 9:47, a 4th bomb detonates, killing 13 civilians and injuring many others. Note, out of several hundred buses in service that morning, it's the only bus that the police take special control of and direct to Tavistock Square.
I've been walking up and down this road, looking at the bus stops for a number 30. The bus stops have all the numbers of the buses on them individually. There's no number 30 on any of the bus stops. That's because the number 30 bus was specifically rerouted here on that day.
To simplify it, there's no bus stop here.
There's no number 30 bus stop here, no.
Well, that was in the news, that it was specifically diverted here.
They admitted that the number 30 bus was the only bus that was directed to a different area of the city. For what reason? Nobody knows, but they admit that. So it's very strange that for no reason it would come down this road when it was bombed.
In London, we spoke with David Shaler, a former MI5 agent who was convicted of breaking the Official Secrets Act and imprisoned for 6 months.
With regard to 7/7, there's been a witness report now included in a local British newspaper called the Cambridge Evening News, in which somebody who was on one of the tube trains says that he didn't see a man with a rucksack. In fact, after the explosion, what he saw was metal pointing upward from the bottom of the carriage. That would indicate, of course, that the bomb was not carried onto the tube train, but was in fact attached underneath it. Now again, nobody in the British national press is following that up. Now I hope investigators and the police are.
A current member of British Parliament and a former cabinet minister in Prime Minister Tony Blair's government, Michael Meacher, was sacked in 2003 for raising important questions on the eve of the Iraq War.
Atrocity of London bombings where 56 people were killed. That was on the 7th of July, 7/7 we call it. It's a very convenient way of ensuring there is fear, of ensuring that there is control, and of ensuring that those who are in the know, and of course we cannot tell you because it is all secret, are in a position of extreme power.
We learned of the drills of 7/7 on 7/7 from Peter Power, the head of Visor Consultants, a crisis management firm based in London. Mr. Power was the former spokesperson for Scotland Yard. Mr. Power told National British Television, ITN News, about the drills.
Today we were running an exercise for a company, bearing in mind I'm now in the private sector, and we sat everybody down in the city, 1,000 people involved in the whole organisation, but the crisis team. And the most peculiar thing was we based our scenario on the simultaneous attacks on the Underground and mainline station. So we had to suddenly switch an exercise from fictional to real. And one of the first things is, get that bureau number. When you have a list of people missing, tell them. And
so
it took a long time.
Just to get this right, you were actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario.
Almost precisely. I was up until 2 o'clock this morning because it's our job, my own company, Visor Consultants. We specialise in helping people to get their crisis management response. How do you jump from slow time thinking to quick time doing? And we chose a scenario with their assistance, which is based on a terrorist attack because they're very close to a property occupied by Jewish businessmen. They're in the city, and there are more American banks in the city than there are in the whole of New York. A logical thing to do. And I've still got the...
I was going to say, how extraordinary today must feel for you as it unfolds.
He repeated himself to BBC Radio 5.
The thing that concerns me is that what are we doing for the thousands of men and women actually who are in London working? And I say that Because at 9:30 this morning, we were actually running an exercise for over a company of 1,000 people in London, based on simultaneous bombs going off precisely at the railway stations that happened this morning. So I still have the hairs on the back of my legs standing upright.
To get this quite straight, you were running an exercise to see how you would cope with this, and it happened while you were running the exercise?
Precisely. And it was about 9:30 this morning. We planned this for a company, and for obvious reasons I don't want to reveal their name, but if they're listening they'll know it. We had a room full of crisis managers for the first time they met, and so within 5 minutes we made a pretty rapid decision. This is the real one. And so we went through the correct drills of activating crisis management procedures to jump from slow time to quick time thinking and so on.
If we use a standard actuary employed by major insurance companies to calculate the probability of these events coinciding in a 10-year mean, we learn that the probability of this happening is greater than 1 in 300 tetragillion. To put that in perspective, that's a number with 41 zeros behind it. That is trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and still more trillions times greater than all the grains of sand in all the world. To put that number in perspective, it has 41 zeros. Scientists using supercomputers have estimated that the Earth has over 7 quintillion grains of sand. A quintillion has 18 zeros. Within hours of the 7/7 bombings, Israeli army radio was reporting that Benjamin Netanyahu, the former prime minister of Israel, had been warned not to leave his hotel that morning to attend a meeting less than 100 yards away from one of the train stations that was bombed. The Associated Press ran the headline, "Netanyahu changed plans due to warning." Then the current Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon's office, instructed Israeli officials not to give interviews to the foreign media concerning the warning. Israel's Foreign Office attempted to spin the story, saying that they'd given a general warning to the British that day. Then, several weeks later, the head of Mossad told a major German newspaper that he indeed had issued a warning to Benjamin Netanyahu at 8:40 a.m., 10 minutes before the first blast. Conveniently for authorities, the bus surveillance camera malfunctioned. Something else happened that was convenient for the establishment line. All 4 of the supposed bombers' identification cards survived unscathed at all 4 events. But there was just one problem. In one case, one of the bombers' IDs was found at 2 separate locations. As the evidence mounts, it is crystal clear. Only criminal elements of the British government could stage the attacks and then engage in the cover-up. The reason the Netanyahu story is important is it clearly shows that other intelligence agencies were aware of what was going on in London that day and took necessary precautions to protect their Minister of Finance.
In 1994, the Israeli embassy in London was bombed. This was at a time when I was in the service. I joined the Middle Eastern section shortly after that, and I was actually astounded to read a document written by a senior MI5 officer who'd seen all the information coming in about this attack, and he said that he believed that the Israelis had bombed their own embassy.
In any staged terror attack, governments have to be extremely careful to keep the operation shielded, compartmentalized. Most people in government are moral individuals who believe that they're standing up for their nation's sovereignty or its national interest, and it's absolutely essential to keep them in the dark. One of the chief tools used by governments as a smokescreen is staging exercises or drills at the exact same time and exact same places as real events. When the Oklahoma City Federal Building was bombed, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was staging an anti-terror drill with their bomb squad on the morning of April 19, 1995, at the same time that the real event took place. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the Pentagon was running 5 separate drills, 2 of the drills targeting the exact same targets at the exact same time. That caused NORAD to stand down, believing it was just a drill. And London was no different. It's important to note that those taking part in the drills need not know that they're part of a larger operation. In fact, it's better for the conspirators that they not be informed. One of the chief reasons this is done is so that if any of the operatives carrying out the attack are caught by other elements of the government, they can simply claim that they were taking part in a drill or an exercise. NSA, Infopol 9, and Echelon-type systems that are scanning for terrorist chatter will be fooled into believing they've simply picked up part of an exercise. On the morning of 7/7 in London, there was a simultaneous exercise targeting the exact same trains, the exact same bus, at the exact same locations, at the very same time.
What you're about to hear is not a Freudian slip. It's a carefully crafted speech as Bush throws it in your face about dark cults of evil gaining power off of human suffering.
The hijackers were instruments of evil who died in vain. Behind them is a cult of evil which seeks to harm the innocent and thrives on human suffering.
A CIA analyst whose career spanned the administrations of John F. Kennedy to George H.W. Bush. His duties included chairing national intelligence estimates and preparing the president's daily brief.
I believe that they are still interested in permanent military bases there. I believe they are still interested in controlling the oil from that part of the world. And so it will be stay the course. It will be 6, 7, 8 U.S. troops killed every day or every week. And what's below the surface here was revealed to me by a very well-heeled gentleman who came up to me after a speech I made outside of Milwaukee in a very affluent suburb. He said, "Mr. McGovern, get real. I mean, what's your problem?" He said, you don't have any problem with, you don't deny that we need the oil, do you? And I said, no. He said, well, 6, 7, 8, 10 Marines a week for the oil. You have to admit that's a very, very cheap price for the oil. I said to him, how do I handle this? I said, well, the utilitarian argument is probably the best. I object to it, said I, because we can't do it. There are 1.3 billion Muslims in this world. They're not going to let us do it.
It's already widening.
The borders are porous. We can't do it. Well, that didn't convince him. He said, well, I think we can do it. I said, oh, well, suppose your son was one of those 6 killed in Iraq last week. And you know what? He looked at me like it had never occurred to him. And it wouldn't have occurred to him because it wouldn't be his son, It would be the sons from the farms, it would be the sons from the cities. And so he said, well, I don't buy that either. So I'm going, well, maybe I'll try a moral argument on it. I said, well, are you one of those that likes to have the 10 Commandments brought into the schoolhouses and the courtrooms of this? He said, oh, that's a great idea. I said, well, if memory serves, there's one that says, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's oil. I mean goods.
Don't bear false witness.
There's one, don't forever what. There's one that says you shouldn't steal. And there's also one against killing, if I remember correctly. So maybe you want to subtract 4 and bring in the 6 commandments into the schoolhouses and the courtrooms of this world. Get real, I said. This is a moral issue. We shouldn't be going around killing unarmed civilians and causing more violence where violence is endemic.
And what did he say?
He turned on his heel, marched out to his SUV, prayed for cheap gasoline, and drove home.
I want the oil. Let's educate them, bring them into democracy, and take their oil.
Theirs is the worst kind of cruelty. The cruelty that is fed, not weakened, by tears. Theirs is the worst kind of violence. Pure malice while daring to claim the authority of God. We cannot fully understand the designs and power of evil. It is enough to know that evil, like goodness, exists. And in the terrorist, evil has found a willing servant.
Think about it. Do defense contractors make more money if they were just in Iraq a year, or now the projected decade? United States, British, and Israeli forces have all been caught repeatedly carrying out staged terror attacks in Iraq in an attempt to keep the war going. In the interest of time, we'll look at just one example. In late September of 2005, in the British-controlled city of Basra, 2 British Special Forces SAS commandos attacked a group of police at a checkpoint, killing one and injuring another. When they were finally subdued and brought into custody, their car was filled with plastic explosives, automatic weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, and other bomb-making materials. Why would members of Britain's most elite fighting force, the Special Air Services, be dressed up like Arabs out shooting police with a car full of plastic explosives in a city that had been racked by sectarian violence? The governor of Basra in Iraq ordered that the British soldiers be held for trial for the murder they'd committed. Within hours of their incarceration, dozens of British tanks and hundreds of soldiers assaulted the main police station in Basra, killing jail guards and police in the process. To free the 2 commandos, Over 150 prisoners escaped, and the controlled mainstream media reported on the incident as if it was no big deal.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
The United States knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein already possesses 2 out of the 3 key components needed to build a nuclear bomb.
In early February of 2006, members of the British government leaked documents that the White House admits are authentic. Known as the White House Memo, it is the minutes of a pre-war meeting between Prime Minister Tony Blair and George Bush in the Oval Office. The minutes contain the discussion of a classic false flag operation, where Bush tried to lure Saddam into war using UN aircraft. Mr. Bush told Tony Blair of the extraordinary plan during a meeting in the White House on January 31, 2003, 6 weeks before the war started, the Times of London reported. The Times reads, President Bush had plans to lure Saddam Hussein into war by flying an aircraft over Iraq painted in UN colors in a hope he would shoot it down. The memo also contained details of President Bush's plan to have defectors claim they had seen weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist.
Well, it is perfectly true that we now know that the evidence, both in the United States and in Britain, which was put before the people, turns out to be wrong. It was known to be wrong. It was fed to Parliament. It was fed to Congress in order to get the necessary support.
But we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
When Congress threatened to block the reauthorization and expansion of the USA Patriot Act in 2006, President Bush announced that he would still enforce the law even if it was not a law. That, by its definition, is dictatorship. When President Bush was caught secretly paying off reporters and newspapers and television stations across the country to the tune of $1.6 billion in 2 years, the Governmental Accounting Office declared it illegal. Every single action by itself was a felony, and there were tens of thousands of instances. President Bush simply said that he was above the law, and it didn't matter if Congress said it was illegal, he was going to continue the practice. When a leader declares themselves above the law, you are living in an official dictatorship.
Evil has found a willing servant.
That a new world order is coming into view, a totalitarian police state.
Here's Bush signing the USA Patriot Act that literally eviscerated the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Section 213 delays warrants. It means they can sneak in your house for any reason, take whatever they want, and never even tell you they were there. But you're like, oh, that's okay. There's a sunset clause. Well, if you look at that subsection, all of the key areas that violate your constitutional rights, there are no sunset provisions. Out of 1,016 sections, 802 has to be the most frightening. You see, the definition of domestic terrorism is anyone that is involved in acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state. Under their definition, jaywalking is now a terrorist action. This is an absolute outrage. The people that pass this legislation, in truth, are the real terrorists, the real criminals engaging in sedition against our constitutional republic. Congressman Ron Paul said that none of the Congress was allowed to even read the bill and threatened by the White House that they wouldn't be patriots if they didn't sign it. He said the founding fathers revolted over much lighter forms of tyranny.
Then President Bush got caught spying on us. Of course, this is something the government's been doing for a long time.
Bush then claimed that the Constitution gave him the right to spy on the American people. Of course, the Constitution and Bill of Rights says the exact opposite. In the midst of the scandal, the retiring head of the National Security Agency went before the National Press Club and informed everyone that there was no need of a warrant in America. He chastised a reporter who claimed that you needed probable cause to search someone. He said all that was needed was that it be, quote, reasonable, and the government would decide what was reasonable.
My understanding is that the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution specifies that you must have probable cause to be able to do a search that does not violate an American's right against unlawful searches and seizures.
Actually, the Fourth Amendment actually protects all of us against unreasonable search and seizure.
But
that's what it says.
The measure is probable cause, I believe.
The amendment says unreasonable search and seizure.
But does it not say probable?
No.
The
The
court
amendment
standard, the
says
legal
unreasonable
standard,
search and seizure.
the legal standard is probable cause. General, you used the terms just a few minutes ago, we reasonably believe. And a FISA court, my understanding is, would not give you a warrant if you went before them and say, we reasonably believe. You have to go to the FISA court, or the Attorney General has to go to the FISA court and say, we have probable cause. And so what many people believe, and I'd like you to respond to this, is that what you've actually done is crafted a detour around the FISA court by creating a new standard of reasonably believe in place of probable cause, because the FISA court will not give you a warrant based on reasonable belief. You have to show a probable cause. Could you respond to that, please?
Sure. I didn't craft the authorization. I am responding to a lawful order. All right? The Attorney General has averred to the lawfulness of the order.
I will now read the Fourth Amendment in its entirety. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall be issued but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Notice the Fourth Amendment clearly states no warrant shall be issued but upon probable cause, and that must be supported by an oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That is the definition of reasonable. Reasonable is having a witness and having probable cause, and specifically knowing what has been done that is wrong and against the law that you're searching for. Not just, oh, we say we're being reasonable. The National Security Agency director clearly knew what he was doing. He knows that 99% of Americans have no idea what the Fourth Amendment actually says. So he claims that it's okay for them to spy on us without a warrant, counting on us being ignorant. That ignorance needs to end. Or maybe he's looking at a Fourth Amendment that the rest of us haven't seen.
They just keep piling it on with law after law, taking away our freedoms.
First thing this morning, the president signed into law the Military Commissions Act of 2006, which does away with habeas corpus, the right of suspected terrorists or anybody else to know why they have been imprisoned, provided the president does not think it should apply to you and declares you an enemy combatant. Further, the bill allows the CIA to continue using interrogation techniques so long as they do not cause what is deemed, quote, serious physical or mental pain. And it lets the president to ostensibly pick and choose which parts of the Geneva Convention to obey. Jonathan Turley, professor of constitutional law at George Washington University. As always, sir, great thanks for your time.
Thanks, Keith.
I want to start by asking you about a specific part of this act that lists one of the definitions of an unlawful enemy combatant as, quote, a person who, before, on, or after the date of the enactment of the Military Commissions Act of 2006, has been determined to be an unlawful enemy combatant by a combatant status review tribunal or another competent tribunal established under the authority of the President or the Secretary of Defense. Does that not basically mean that if Mr. Bush or Mr. Rumsfeld say so, anybody in this country, citizen or not, innocent or not, can end up being an unlawful enemy combatant?
It certainly does. In fact, later on, it says that if you even give material support to an organization that the president deems is connected to one of these groups, you too can be an enemy combatant. And the fact that he appoints this tribunal is meaningless. You know, standing behind him at the signing ceremony was the Attorney General who signed a memo that said that you could torture people, that you could do harm to them to the point of organ failure or death. So if he appoints someone like that to be Attorney General, you can imagine who he's going to be putting on this board.
Does this mean that under this law, ultimately the only thing keeping you, I, or the viewer out of Gitmo is the sanity and honesty of the President of the United States?
It does, and it's a huge sea change for our democracy. The framers created a system where we did not have to rely on the good graces or good mood of the president. In fact, Madison said that he created a system essentially to be run by devils, where they could not do harm because we didn't rely on their good motivations. Now we must. People have no idea how significant this is, what really a time of shame this is for the American system. What the Congress did and what the President signed today essentially revokes over 200 years of American principles and values. It couldn't be more significant. And the strange thing is we become sort of constitutional couch potatoes. I mean, the Congress just gave the president despotic powers, and you could hear the yawn across the country as people turned to, Dancing with the Stars. I mean, it's otherworldly.
Unfortunately, we may not always be able to tell you why that agent or agents are knocking on your door. Is there a chance that some of your civil liberties may slip while we guarantee the security of this country? Maybe. Maybe.
Slimeball FBI agents like Steven Steinhauser are all over the country in huge meeting halls telling people they've got to give up their liberty for security. Now we're seeing urban warfare teams pop up in major cities and small towns alike. They'd like you to believe that this is some new phenomenon that they have to do since September 11th. We're about to go into the evidence of what's been going on in the last decade here in the United States, how they were training the cadres, the groups of officers, to go out and train the massive troops for a total militarized takeover of the United States of America in the name of protecting the population from enemy terrorists. In truth, the military's been training to attack the American population. Back in 1999, Texas got hit by 6 black helicopter raids, police stations on fire, military checkpoints, mayors throwing them out of their cities, police chiefs going public. We had Czechoslovakian troops running around firing automatic weapons. And this was not a drill. This was to condition the public, to acclimate them to accept the military with foreign troops working with our local police. You're witnessing actual footage of Delta Force troops, U.S. Special Forces with Czechoslovakian troops running around in downtown Kingsville, setting fire to local structures. I thought black helicopters didn't exist. From Fort Bragg?
Yeah.
Delta Force?
Yeah.
Looking out your window, seeing unmarked helicopters and troops dressed in ninja black suits with assault rifles, it's kind of spooky.
But that's the point of the operation. It's to train the public, the police, and the military that all of this is okay. The military can engage the population. Now here's the mayor of Port Aransas, and he was extremely upset. Then we'll talk to a police chief of San Antonio.
Nobody wants to get in their business, but we ought to be able to answer questions, especially when they're, flying at dangerously low levels and alerting the citizenry.
The chief of police of San Antonio refused for 2 years to let Delta Force take over the city. When he refused, they just did it anyway. They don't care about local authorities.
Approached me and get me to change my mind. Well, then, when we said no, then some elected officials were contacted to bring pressure to bear. And then offers were made to give money, cash money, to elected officials' charities if they could get us to change our minds. I mean, as one of my deputy chiefs said, in some circles that's called bribery in and around the San Antonio area, but we're allowed to do them here. Next time, I'm still getting contacted by various officials. I mean, they never would take no for an answer.
So they weren't respecting your jurisdiction?
They were not respecting our jurisdiction. I don't think they respected our decision to go into predominantly minority areas of the city where we had vacant warehouses and buildings and try to do those types of exercises at those locations in the middle of the night.
Oh, I'm sorry, middle of the night?
In the middle of the night. Sometime between 9 p.m. and midnight. People become frightened. And we do a lot of our decision-making on experiences that had happened in a lot of other cities. We were very concerned with some things that have happened over there, and we didn't get any real good, clear answers.
So they were being secretive about it?
Very secretive.
We're just curious about Army Special Operations from Fort Bragg coming here, Delta Force. And we'd like basically to ask some questions about was the public informed beforehand? Are y'all aware of the 10th Amendment and posse comitatus and things like that?
No, I'm probably not aware of the 10th Amendment, but I made the decision not to inform the public.
He made the decision not to warn the public or the emergency managers or the police when 8 black helicopters slammed into the town. Here's the chief of police in Alice admitting foreign troops.
Government is training other so-called friendly countries, or?
They are training friendly countries, and I'm not at liberty to give you their names, but I know that they are. And
they were there in Alice, or a couple weeks ago.
There was some present, yes, sir.
The Foreign troops were there, now the NATO aircraft are in our skies. And they get to burn out police stations 3 days after the police pull out. It had to be a proper spectacle.
Well, here we are in Northern California in Oakland. And Marines have come in for Operation Urban Warrior, what should be deemed Operation Desensitization of the Population. And they have their role players, they have their fake camps set up, you name it. We're going to take you in and show you what's happening.
Attention, attention, attention. American forces are here to help. Remain calm. We will not tolerate civil disobedience. Attention, attention, attention. American forces are here to help. Please remain calm. We will not tolerate civil disobedience.
I've made 2 documentary films about the police state and been to dozens of these military training operations where they hire hundreds of role players to beg and scream, "We're Americans, please don't put us in camps, don't take our guns."
Attention, attention, attention. Due to the large number of people arriving, we'll experience a short delay. Please remain calm and cooperate so that we can process you into the camp faster.
Hey, I won't be duck in the gaten. Wat? Duck! Niet die op, duck, niet die op. Nee, maakt niet uit. As a hostile act. The technologies are what makes you nauseous. In the past, in a situation like that, she might have been shot. In the future, we want to give our Marines non-lethal options where they can say, no, she's not armed, maybe threatening, but I don't want to kill her, or I don't want to kill him, or them. Use your sound wave rifle, I guess you could call it, and down they go.
Yeah, him in prison, huh?
Now you're going to see an execution.
Send your IDs ready up the scanner. I got 5 kids. I need pampers and diapers and milk.
Okay, these guys have plastic handcuffs available.
Well, I think terrorism is being practiced on the residents of the city of Oakland because many of the retired teachers, retired military people have informed me that they understand what's going on, and it is not anything that relates to humanitarian training whatsoever. This is a psychological, as we in the research community say, this is a psyops. They're preparing people for what is coming, not what is being presented today.
So you're saying they're preparing people to accept it with incrementalism?
That is correct, like the old frog example. You know, you put the frog in the water and you just gradually continue to raise the heat on the water until the frog is cooked. And that's the way it works.
Here are just a few of the measures being implemented for complete control of the population.
Bush also successfully rammed through the Orwellian-named New Freedom Initiative. This forces every child in America from age 5 to 18 to be psychologically tested twice a year, whether you're homeschooled, private schooled, or public schooled. The guidelines for mental illness were written by a consortium of drug companies, and in their own internal documents, they bragged that they'll go from 15% of American children on psychotropic drugs and Ritalin to over 50%. The law states that without parental consent, while your child is at school, they will be forcibly tested. And Illinois is already jumping ahead. They're saying they're going to start forcibly testing all pregnant women. This is the type of nightmare that only Joseph Stalin could dream of. But our government is making it a reality. But if you look at foster children in America, over 2/3 of them are on psychotropic drugs. That's what happens when the state has control. 2/3 on drugs. Well, I guess that's the new freedom. The federal government has spent billions and billions of dollars putting up cameras across the nation, except for our borders. I have seen over 50 mainstream reports where video cameras are put in school bathrooms and showers. And when the schools get caught doing it, they say it's for your safety. And now the establishment just throws it in our face. Prepare to be scanned. We track you with your cell phones. We're putting cameras up on the street corners that read all your license plates and track everywhere you go. And we're going to tax you with these new cameras. We're going to put satellite tracker boxes in all your cars and transponders. We're going to tax you by the mile. This is just the way it is, so get used to it. Oh, and 8 years ago, we started putting black boxes in all the new cars that track everything you do as well. And now industry and the federal government are just calmly saying that soon all new cars will have a camera in them that scan your face as you drive and instantly report back to the police department if you're driving while you're tired or if you're arguing with your wife. Under a new sales tax system being prepared that will be implemented to the national ID card, you'll have to thumb scan when you buy and sell. And the face scanning cameras we mentioned will keep track of you not just in your car, but as you walk down the street. Almost every federal, state, and local road in the country will be satellite and transponder tracked. We already mentioned that earlier. And when Californians heard about Governor Schwarzenegger's program, they got very upset, and over 90% of them were against it in polls. The governor just said, I don't care what you want, we're going to do this. It's going to take the average tax by the mile from 25 cents at the state level to over $3. Read it for yourself. It's the official news reports. Similar plans are being pushed by the feds in all 50 states. But that's just the financial hardship. There'll no longer be any open road. Everything you do will be tracked, chronicled, and traced. Whether it's a large highway or a rural road, everywhere you go will be chronicled. And in middle schools across the country, students are having to wear RFID tags around their necks, tracking and training them how to be good little prisoners. And now hospitals are openly discussing making their patients take implantable microchips. Bars in the United States and Europe make their patrons take chips before they can enter the VIP sections. And now the Mexican Attorney General has forced over 160 of his deputies to take implantable microchips if they want to work in his office.
Something has to change, though. They have to find a better way to identify the bad guys, or the rest of us are going to stay home and watch the world go by on television. But we need some system for permanently identifying safe people. Most of us are never going to blow anything up, and there's got to be something better than one of these photo IDs, a tattoo somewhere maybe. The Saudis used an American device to scan the eyes of travelers. I wouldn't mind having something planted permanently in my arm that would identify me. If we don't do something, people are going to stop flying. If they stop flying, and I don't go to the Giants games, it means the bastards have won.
Yeah, we're not going to let you win, buddy. We saw what you just implied. We're with Al-Qaeda if we don't take the microchip.
We have a Florida family who are really pioneers in a brave new world. They have volunteered to be the first ever to have microchip identification devices implanted into their body.
After 9/11, I was really concerned with the security of my family.
Top CFR Lieutenant Diane Sawyer for 8 minutes sat there in a sickening fashion with this poor, pathetic family as they discussed how they were all taking microchips because they believed in America and wanted to stop the terrorist. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something out of a science fiction horror movie. They're taking chips because they stand with the mother government. I'm living in Nazi Germany Twilight Zone. Now politicians are announcing that they want to get chipped. The globalists have been systematically engaging in a massive brainwashing campaign, telling the public that torture is a good idea. And now we've seen the aftermath of torture. The Joseph Mengele-style abuses include killing detainees and harvesting their organs. But they don't just torture people to death. They do things so horrible we can't even mention them here. And there's no mystery when it comes to finding out who ordered all of this ultra-brutal torture at Camp X-Ray at Guantanamo Bay and Gitmo and 32 other camps in Iraq.
Alberto Gonzales and Chertoff and the rest of Bush's crew openly wrote memos detailing how torturing people unto death is an okay thing to do. It's part of the public record. The White House and Pentagon ordered the torture, but when they got caught, they just burned a few of their underlings. The Pentagon's own reports admit that 90% of those that were picked up at checkpoints in Iraq were totally innocent, but that didn't stop them from being tortured. In fact, the Army's own report admits that military dogs were used to bite and frighten detainees, that women were brutally raped, that detainees were beaten to death and sodomized with large objects dripping with battery acid. People's children were also raped in front of them to attain answers. This is the same type of mentality we see from serial killers, and it's riddled with all sorts of perverted sexual abuse. Is this what the land of the free and the home of the brave has become? After 13 years of sanctions, over 1.5 million Iraqis died, 700,000 of them children. And now thousands of private contractors have taken over the torture where the Pentagon left off, following in the footsteps of other famous control freak serial killers and torturers. The only reason the elite is selling us on torture is because they want to condition us to where we will accept its use against us. And it's been going on for decades in America, in the prisons, and against pro-life demonstrators, environmental activists, and anyone else that doesn't totally submit to their tyranny. The footage you're seeing is from the late 1980s and early 1990s, where the police openly pulled out nunchucks, started wrapping it around the arms of peaceful pro-life demonstrators and brutally breaking them, simply because they refused to get off the side of the sidewalk. The police thought it was their right to break people's arms because they didn't follow their orders.
They used nunchucks on the rescuers. This is an illegal martial arts weapon, and merely possessing one in California is a felony. To be attacked with one is assault with a deadly weapon. Never before in the history of America have nunchucks been used on non-violent protesters. This is the gruesome sight of what happened. The police, in unprovoked cruelty, wrapped the nunchucks around Michael Hausman's arm and broke it. When lawyers went to federal Judge Tashima to request he order the police to cease using them, he denied the request, saying in so many words that pro-lifers could not prove they were in any danger.
I can't tell you what it's like to be lying on the ground with police officers on top of you, using all sorts of torture holds to make you walk. You can't walk even if you wanted to walk, and their sole intent is to torture you, and then listening to the screams of the people.
When you bring out riot sticks, it's usually because you expect to see some serious opposition, so you put on helmets and you put on face masks and you carry shields. These policemen were bareheaded.
But here it was calculated torture, and the policemen were enjoying the pain. They laughed at the people screaming, and all of us screaming, all grown men, mature men. You couldn't help but scream. What happened was when the two nightsticks squeezed on the wrists, they cut off the nerve ends and the flow of blood, and your hands swelled up to almost twice the size, and then they turned black.
It didn't matter whether you were a woman, a man, an old person. It didn't matter what your age, sex, or anything, that they were just there. They were going to brutalize everybody. And I think probably to the women more particularly, that they were very angry that they couldn't get a young woman like myself to walk. And I could tell that it was a pride issue.
This is an important illustration because it shows us how long this tyranny has been going on in this country. And if they can get away with it with one group, they can get away with it against everybody. The fact of the matter is, the establishment and its enforcers have been setting the precedent for a long time to torture women in plain view of the public, to use illegal nunchucks and break people's arms.
And now in Iraq, they have these big live TV shows with all the people confessing after they've been openly tortured. And in 2005, people they take into hospitals who refuse drug tests are restrained and then tasered repeatedly until they go ahead and urinate in a cup. And there are hundreds and hundreds of examples we don't even have time to cover here. The point is, this is all macabre and terrifying, and the New World Order is conditioning us to accept it. We must resist it.
Herald, big newspaper in West Virginia. Christians a hate group. They found out the FBI and law enforcement schools across the state, and it's going on around the country, are teaching them that Christians, period, are hate criminals, are part of a terrorist group if they believe in a second coming of Christ. And all this comes right out of the Project Megiddo report, where they list homeschoolers, gun owners, anybody that cares about freedom, anyone that believes in Jesus Christ, anyone that believes in a second coming. Again, where did the First Amendment go? Anyone that discusses a New World Order conspiracy theory. Well, you've heard world leaders say a New World Order throughout this documentary. Anyone that talks about a New World Order takeover. The evidence is clear. If you resist the New World Order takeover, you're being demonized as a hate criminal. Look, it lists homeschoolers as terrorists. Remember, if you say New World Order, you're a terrorist.
It is a big idea, a new world order. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
The President George Bush has talked time and time again about a new world order. And this is the best chance to begin to establish the new world order.
Where is this all leading? I promise I'm wrapping up. Well, Alvin and Heidi Toffler wrote a book called Creating a New Civilization. The foreword, by the way, was written by Newt Gingrich. This, by the way, was the first required book in his college curriculum. It opens by telling us that a new civilization is emerging in our lives, and blind men everywhere, that's you and me, are trying to suppress it. This new civilization brings with it new family styles, changed ways of working, loving, and living, a new economy, new political conflicts, and beyond all this, an altered consciousness as well. I haven't even gotten into the religious aspect of the new curriculum. It's New Age. It's New Age. The book ends with this statement: "For this wisdom above all, we thank Mr. Jefferson," he's talking history, "who helped create the system that served us so well for so long and that now must, in its turn, die and be replaced." What system was that? It was a system that gave us the Declaration of Independence, the idea that God gave us our rights and freedoms, that government was instituted only to secure those rights and freedoms, not to take over the role of God, not to put himself on man's throne. George Washington warned us, whatever measures contribute to violate or lessen the sovereign authority ought to be considered as hostile to liberty and independence of America, and the authors of them treated accordingly. Folks, this is treason. That's the word for it, treason.
The New World Order gang has a reason they want to control you, and they've bragged about it. Now the Bilderberg Group and Reuters, which they own, have gone public that they actually groom our presidents, our prime ministers, that yes, they really are international bankers. Yes, they are royal families. Yes, they do run the central banks, and that we are the property of a global superstate. In Reuters, they're throwing it in your face, which is owned by a Bilderberg Group member, like Prince Philip. Prince Philip, in his own publication, If I Was an Animal, brags about how he would kill 80% of the population, how his great dream is to come back as a virus. Ladies and gentlemen, this is in your face. These psychos are creating a matrix-like control system and talking about killing you. From Ted Turner at the UN to Prince Philip, they're out of control and on a massive power trip. Nature. Then there are the mysterious Georgia Guidestones owned by Illuminati leaders.
that actually talks about reducing the world population by 80%. That number we heard from Prince Philip and Ted Turner so many times before. How they must maintain the population forcibly at 500 million. And now, in recently declassified government documents in Australia, we learned that world-famous microbiologists, Nobel Prize winners, were actually planning to release biological weapons to reduce an overpopulated world. The revelation is contained in top-secret files declassified by the National Archives of Australia.
We are in the 11th hour, and it has already started raining, and the water is rising.
Pentagon war planners now publicly admit that 90% of their battle plans are psychological versus physical. The information war has taken the place of aircraft carriers, fighter bombers, and Abrams M1A tanks. And you, the population of the planet, are the target. Put simply, modern warfare is all about selling the population to love its own enslavement. The elite are waging war on the people. Edward L. Bernays is regarded by many as the father of public relations. He was born in Vienna, Austria. Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Bernays pioneered the use of psychology and other social sciences to design public persuasion campaigns. He published several scholarly works, still used in universities worldwide today. On page 71 of his book Propaganda, Bernays wrote, "If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing about it?" Bernays literally wrote the book on modern propaganda. His clients included Procter & Gamble, CBS Television, the United Fruit Company, the American Tobacco Company, General Electric, Dodge Motors, and he also spearheaded the national campaign to fluoridate the water supply of America through the Fluoridationist of the Public Health Service. He was hired by multiple presidents to engage in propaganda campaigns against the American people, as well as the U.S. Army. Another quote from his book Propaganda: "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our government. We are governed, our minds are molded, our taste formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of." Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels publicly praised Bernays on many occasions and stated that Bernays' work was the blueprint used by the Nazis to seize control of the Reich. Edward Bernays advanced the science of propaganda light years. But more than 60 years after his heyday, the science of mind control is thousands of times more sophisticated than even Bernays had envisioned. Since the dawn of man, bullies have attempted to dominate and control the tribe. Human history has been one long struggle of the independent free human against organized crime syndicates attempting to enslave him. Brute force has been replaced with intimidation and propaganda. We are manipulated into enslaving ourselves. We are conned into believing that the establishment is our loving keeper and not our parasitic master. The New World Order architects are a group of predatory control freaks who have enslaved humanity and are desperate to keep control of their cattle. The elite is threatened by independent free humans who control their own destinies. They're threatened by intelligence, by beauty, by honor, by family. They seek to control and steer the destiny of humanity in a direction that secures their power monopoly forever. They are sadistic, they are callous, they think nothing of human life, only control and keeping that control. The entire world is being engineered, designed to be a prison planet, a control grid over free humanity, where no dissent is tolerated. Once you realize that the establishment is laughing at you, you can begin to research the truth and start fighting back. Once you understand their game plan, it's very easy to defeat. Knowing who your enemy is half the battle. Taking action is the other half. You only have to free your mind, and defeating the globalist will be easy.
Now this is just a fraction of the evidence that is available, not to mention everything that is hidden. Please, I urge you to check this out for yourself and to get involved, for together we can make a difference. I encourage you to make copies of this DVD and pass them out to friends, family, neighbors, and anyone who is interested. Please help spread the message. Wake people up to what is going on before it is too late, so we can lessen what is coming, what they are implementing. Most important of all, I recommend that you pray for peace, for there will be no peace without God. Peace be with you.